Welcome to the Be Student Podcast, and thank you for joining me. I'm Betsy Gardner. I'm a CEO in Central Florida, a public speaker, a business consultant, and executive coach. I've worked across many industries and sectors, spanning several global markets. As the president and CEO of the Winter Park Chamber, I have the unique opportunity of connecting with the most dynamic, talented, and innovative professionals across our region. Think about it as the B side to a record, where there's the thing that they recorded as the hit, but then there's the stuff they're passionate about on the B side. I launched Be Student Podcast to bring the experts I'm in conversation with on a daily basis to you, to help you be more successful and impactful in your work. So let's get started. I'm Betsy Gardner, President and CEO of the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce, and your host for the Be Student Podcast, where today we're going to hear from Nick Seidule of the Seidule Law Firm and Bartleby, which is a jury consultancy. Nick has an amazing track record with seating juries, using his emotional intelligence as his key weapon to help drill down to jurors that can help either help his case or get them off the jury if they're going to hurt his case. He has a lot to share on how emotional intelligence can help you perform better in your business and community impact models. And we're so excited to share what his tips and tricks are with you today. Emotional intelligence is going to be one of the key differentiating ingredients in business success, moving into a more automated and potentially fragmented world. So we're excited to share today his tips on how to show up more emotionally intelligent in your workplace. Welcome to the Be Student Podcast, where we explore the B sides of people who are making a difference in business and in our culture and in our communities. Today, I'm with Nick Seidule of the Bartleby firm, who's also with the Seidule Law Firm. Today, we're going to explore emotional intelligence, which is increasingly becoming a bigger subject of communication and business success. And we know that it's going to be one of the critical components moving into the disrupted world of AI. We all hear about AI all the time, and we're all maybe with anxiety thinking about what that's going to mean for us. What it also means is that there is going to be a greater and greater demand for that organic human interaction of what remains after the AI disruption. So we are going to get into it, talking a little bit about emotional intelligence, but I just want to frame kind of what emotional intelligence is and what it does before we get started and I introduce Nick. So emotional intelligence is about self-awareness, situational awareness, relationship capability, communication skills. It's part of that soft skills suite that we hear is in such short supply as digital natives enter the workforce and as we become more fragmented and disrupted by technology. We know that it makes a difference. Highly emotionally intelligent people are usually put in leadership roles. We know that emotional intelligence accounts for 60% of people's professional and personal achievements, but only about 36% of people worldwide are emotionally intelligent. And as I said, the demand for EQ skills is going to grow about sixfold into the future. We know that emotional intelligence has a 58% influence on job performance, and 90% of top performers at work are measured as having high EQ. We know that employers with empathetic leaders have a more engaged workforce who are delivering more value that can be quantified on the bottom line. And so we know that it's important, and we know that we don't see it as often as we would like. Today, we're with Nick Seidule, who, as part of the privilege of my job, I get to interact with hundreds of business leaders, and all of them are successful in their own right. Nick is obviously successful as a lawyer, but what interests me about bringing him in today is I would consider you, Nick, and welcome, as
Thank
the
you.
Simone Biles of emotional intelligence.
Wow.
And that's really why I wanted to sit down and talk about this today. So, when you think about emotional intelligence, I think a lot of people think it's about being nice. And I see you weaponize emotional intelligence in the work that you do. Nick is a trained attorney, but is also an expert jury selection consultant. Tell us a little bit about your work first, and then how you use emotional intelligence to be successful.
Sure, Betsy. First, thanks for having me on. This is great. I'm very honored. My name is Nick Seidule. I've been an attorney since 2009, born and raised in Winter Park. Only left to go to law school. I became a lawyer, started practicing as a prosecutor here in Orange County, moved on to personal injury, and during that time just kind of was assisting friends in picking juries. And I clearly could see that I had a knack for it that other people
So
did.
were you doing that over drinks with friends, or were you actually going into the courtroom
Going
and
in.
tapping them on the shoulder? Okay.
Well, I trained under somebody from South Florida who's kind of the eminent figure in the field. He's a little older.
Of jury selection.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I used that, started to get better at it, and noticed that I have an inclination towards it. Since then, the company has grown, and the success and the resolutions that we've had have grown. And
hold on, let's talk about your win and
Sure.
loss record, because
Sure.
I've asked you this question.
Yes,
I think
changed.
This is amazing.
It's changed since
All
we've
right.
discussed.
So the juries that you've seated, your
Yes.
record is how many? What do you call it? Wins or?
Yeah. So a win is not just a win. It's what I'd consider a favorable outcome, which
Okay.
means a settlement during trial, or breaking a proposal for settlement is automatically favorable. But basically just a win is not always just a win.
Right.
Favorable outcome.
Right.
128 is as of yesterday, and I've had 16 unfavorable outcomes.
That is an amazing record.
I would say, though, those are on slip and falls, mostly. Slip and falls are very tough. So,
well,
just
still,
saying.
it's an amazing record. And so when we think about, I always say, I only want to involve myself in business and stuff that can get measured, right? And so when you think about you're using your emotional intelligence to deliver those kinds of numbers, I mean, that's pretty incredible.
And that emotional intelligence is what I identified into the practice that was kind of what I was doing. I didn't have a name for it yet. I started researching how I could get better. It was something that I really enjoyed. And I stumbled across the idea that I had been very roughly practicing, which is now kind of known as emotional intelligence. And much like you said, it's not just trying to make people happy or trying to make people feel good at all. In fact, I would argue a lot of times, based on what somebody's going through in their life, trying to make them feel happy or trying to make them feel immediately better generically is going to make it worse. Like it's not going to help.
So I've read about emotional intelligence as really an expression of empathy, and empathy
Yes.
can be viewed in three ways: cognitive, which is I see what you think,
Mm-hmm.
or emotional, which is I see how you feel, and then there's empathetic, which is I care about you.
Mm-hmm.
So necessarily you're not caring about people in your jury box, right?
Correct.
But you are trying to understand how they think, how they feel. So much emotion is being brought into a courtroom in that situation. Help us understand a little bit of your process and how
Sure.
you're going into how do you think, how do you feel?
Sure. So it is based on a general idea that I do think as we go out into the world, everybody puts on their mask before they leave. Everybody, our culture is built on it. I mean, when we walk up and say hi to each other, we go, "How are you doing?" We're not really expecting them to say, "Well, my wife's cheating on me, and
Today I'm really struggling."
Yeah,
right.
Today, like I'm worried that I'm not going to pay my bills at the end of the month. Like that, we're not really looking for that. We have a culture built on pleasantries that people are expected to give a generic answer to. So when you walk out, I think everybody's wearing a mask, but that means almost nothing if you know what you're looking for.
Okay.
Everybody is trying really hard to tell you who they are. They're trying really hard to tell you what they're going through.
So how are they doing that?
Small comments, things that people say, eye movement, body language when you speak with them. And the courtroom setting is a very accelerated version of that, in my opinion. So when you're sitting in a courtroom, you've walked in, let's say you're a marketing specialist. An online marketing specialist. So you don't even really deal with people very often. And you're called to jury duty, and now you're in a room with 50 other people, a judge in a robe, 10 attorneys, a couple injured parties, deputies with guns walking around, and you're sitting there, and now you're asked these off the wall questions that you have no idea what they
Give
mean.
us an example of a question.
So, I mean, we ask questions like, how do you feel about the civil justice system? Does anybody think that our justice system is broken? And then it's interspersed with, what does your spouse do for a living? Are you the leader of any organizations, HOA, leadership, any sort of organizations, things like that?
What if I said yes? Would I be disqualified? I mean, I know I'd probably be disqualified on all kinds of grounds, but if I said yes to an HOA presidency.
So luckily there are no direct answers, because I'd probably be out of a job if it was so easy as to say one thing.
Okay.
However, I can tell you being the president of HOA is not going to help your cause.
Okay. If you want to get on the jury.
That is somebody, to me, who is really fired up about what they do. That's somebody who's going to come in with preconceived notions. It's going to be hard to convince them otherwise. Being the president, and now there are different types of HOAs as well, just to get real nitpicky. A 2 or 3 townhouse has to have an HOA. That's a different president than a 260 unit HOA. So those tell me different things. But if you're the president of a 206 unit HOA, you are a tough person to convince of your position.
So you're looking for people who are easier to convince.
I'm looking for people, not necessarily. What I'm looking for people from are people that we consider to be socially responsible, which are people that have an overall compassionate view, people who think we're in this together, and people who are willing to listen to how pain affects an individual through their life.
How do they show you that?
Many, many ways. Really, though, to be honest with you, unfortunately, in our culture, I find that I'm not looking for good jurors. I'm looking to disqualify bad jurors, which is the opposite of that. It's people who have strong ideals of personal responsibility that would not allow them to see how pain affects you other than just dollars and cents of medical bills. A great example of this, to kind of put it in perspective, is immediately after COVID, jury verdicts were going up for pain and suffering. My theory is that everybody was locked in for a year and a half. People had family members they probably never got to say goodbye to because of quarantine. People started to realize the value of the moments in our lives, that it's not just the medical bills. It's something that the reason we're alive is to share these experiences, and they actually saw the value of it. So verdicts went up after that. Unfortunately, it does feel as though, to me, people are already starting to forget that, but I digress.
So when I'm looking for a bad juror to disqualify or a good juror to disqualify, in the field of emotional intelligence, we can look at nonverbal cues, we can look at statements they make, we can look at how they're shifting in their seat, what they're wearing. Tell me what you're, without giving away the secret sauce, we are not expecting you to do that, but tell us what you're looking for that we can give our listeners as maybe an inspiration point for what they could do to show up more emotionally intelligent, or to sort of present more emotional intelligence when they're making business decisions or business interactions. I know that, like, I always say I dress my calendar. So I choose what I'm going to wear based on what version of me I want to be projecting that day. So if it's, a less disarming one, or maybe I want to be more impressive looking, or, I'll use whatever weapons I can nonverbally to do that. Tell me what you're looking for in a juror in terms of nonverbal cues or statements they're making.
Well, dress is very important to me. And not just how you dress, it's how much you care about how you dress. And the most important thing that I think comes in with jury consulting, but also if you're trying to use EQ to further and to further understand anybody or situation, is context. There are no answers. It's all going to be contextual with that person's background. So if somebody's from a lower income socioeconomic sphere, because they're not wearing beautiful, expensive clothes does not mean they don't care about how they present. You're looking then to see how they present with what they have. The same goes the other way. Like, for example, just yesterday, I had a doctor, 32-year-old doctor, on a jury panel at Advent Health. He wore Crocs with no socks, sweatpants, and a tank top to jury selection.
To court.
To court. to sworn jury selection, that's what he was wearing.
Now, hold on. Does that make him a good juror or a bad juror?
The fact that he was a doctor makes him a terrible juror. So he was disqualified at that time. But he
let's talk about it through the lens of EQ.
Sure,
that he wore that outfit. Does that signal for you this is a winner, or maybe somebody you want to pass on?
So it's two things that it could tell me. Either A, he really does not care about what he looks like, or he cares enough about what other people perceive of him that he's willing to like go beyond to go anti, like a Post Malone type idea.
Okay.
So, and then you find that out through the other responses.
Sweatpants or the face tattoo of the doctor's outfit that day.
Where you're like, this is what I'm doing because this is what I'm doing in spite of.
Okay.
So, I mean, that is a different example than the Columbia shirt example. Okay. Columbia fishing shirts have collars and buttons.
Okay.
And for that reason, a lot of people find it appropriate to wear to court. Regardless of whether I think that's appropriate or not, I think wearing a Columbia vented fishing shirt to court thinking it's your collared shirt says a lot about you. That's something that I can easily see where somebody's coming from.
So I won't date guys that wear fishing shirts out to dinner. Yeah. So we're bonded on the Columbia fishing shirt with apologies to Columbia. But what I will say is, tell me what that means to you when you see a Columbia fishing shirt in the courthouse.
That means that when they woke up that morning, they thought, I have to wear a collared shirt. I'm going to court, and Columbia shirt's good enough.
Bare minimum.
Yeah.
And does that make a good juror or a bad juror?
Not great.
Okay.
To me, it signifies privilege.
Okay.
And a lot of this is seeking out somebody's privilege. When you've lived a life of privilege, it's hard for you to understand pain and inconvenience that people go through, I think. And when you think I'm going to be fine if I wear my Columbia shirt, to me, that's you've woken up your whole life and you're like, yeah, nobody's going to say anything to me. I can wear this Columbia shirt if I want to. I can wear shorts and flip-flops because they've lived a life where nobody's really ever had to tell them no or been able to tell them no.
So we are meeting on the mountaintop right now of how important clothing is as a nonverbal cue. I don't think it's important as a fashion statement as much as I think it's in business. One of the things that you need to pull out of your quiver as a weapon to present yourself, right? And my son graduated from engineering school 2 years ago. And I said, okay, let's go pick out clothes for you. And he said, Mom, I'm working on a factory floor. Everybody wears a hoodie. And I said, well, your management team doesn't.
Yeah.
And I want you to dress like your management team so they see you as one of them. And he said, oh, I hadn't thought about that, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge believer in this, especially for women. It's a way for women to close that gravitas gap that exists in our culture. It's a way for a person of color to close the gravitas gap. I think clothes are super important in that realm, and they don't need to be expensive. But I loved how you talked about that earlier, where you're looking for people that take pride in their appearance. And so tell us a little bit more about that, if you don't mind, because we're really aligned on this. I
could talk about this all day. I've been incredibly particular about what I wear from an extremely young age. I have pictures of me going to kindergarten where it's like, it's not that I'm wearing a suit. It's not flashy. And like you said, it's not a fashion statement, but everything means something. I really do feel that a lot of people are understanding EQ without even knowing that's what they're looking for. There's the nonverbal cues will hit them and they get an idea of somebody the minute they walk in. So fit is extremely important, I think, more than cost of anything. Most of my clothes don't cost very much. It's the fit of the clothes that is most important to me. It shows that you care. It shows that you woke up and you cared. So I mean, that's a great example, but really I'd say once you go too far into fashion, you're also saying something about yourself, I think. I think it's really finding things that fit well and convey the idea that you're trying to get across. Not so much I need to go, just go spend whatever I can at Neiman Marcus, get the highest level of whatever I can get. It's more so, what does this say about me? What am I trying to say? What am I trying to do? And just for me personally, it's clean, solid colors, like well fit is the most important thing.
Well, and I think one of my hopes is that there'll be takeaways from people. So here we're talking to the Simone Biles of emotional intelligence,
that's
right?
Like, that makes me intimidated when you say that. That's a good, like,
okay,
the
but I
greatest
think you're like
that
good at that, right? Like, so in the conversations we've had, I've just been wowed and awed by the way that you use your emotional intelligence. And what I want is for people to take practical inspiration points away from this. And so I cannot focus enough on nonverbal cues. And I think talking about clothing is one of them. What are some other nonverbal cues that you look for or use or can recommend to listeners to think about?
Remember context, because the first thing everybody's going to say, especially if you were to read any book from a jury consultant, they have or an interrogator, which is where I've gotten a lot of the information from, is that they will always say crossing your arms, looking to the left, crossing, uncrossing your legs, which way you're shaped. That is all well and good. But
how am I doing right now?
I mean, well, we're facing each other. That's what they would say is great. Contextually, though, is what's important to me. The example, like crossing your arms. Somebody could be crossing their arms in a courtroom because they're not liking what you're saying.
Or they don't want to be there.
Or they're cold. I mean, it happens. So it's all about the context. I try to develop who they are and then see when there's an anomaly. If somebody's doing something that's outside the scope of what they should be doing. Like somebody's giving a very confident, compassionate speech, and you see them look down and just the moment of quiver or something that you can catch with a lip or the arm, the hand, and then they come back and they're back in scene. That shows you that this person's masked up confidence, not just born with this, like didn't come in here ready to rock and roll. There is some nervous energy going on underneath that. And like I said, people they bleed it, they sweat it. They can't not tell you who they are because it's so deep inside.
So give us some more tells.
I mean, all right, so anger is pretty easy to see in what I do.
How does that show up?
So people will make short, adjusted comments where they kind of go up or down depending at the end of the circumstance. When we get into lawyer advertising, we have to go through lawyer advertising. Some of my clients advertise, some of my clients don't, but you have to go through it because they saw 15 billboards driving into the courthouse. Right. So when you're going through that, you get some people who immediately, so somebody who's been sitting like this and talk about a lawyer advertising, if that's the moment they cross their arms, if that's the moment they start change the inflection, you can tell something about that made them angry. But they're probably, because they're sitting in front of 50 people and a judge, way too nervous to ever say, yeah, I hate you. Like I will never give $1 to a personal injury lawyer. But they're bleeding it out. They'll go, I can follow the law. I mean, I'm fair and impartial. And in their mind, they're like, yeah.
I think that's so interesting. I got recruited for a senior role a long time ago where I was flown across the country. I'd been through 7 rounds of interviews. The CEO wanted me. He was crazy about the idea of me coming on board. And he brought in the COO to lunch. And I knew that the way this guy had built his venture ecosystem is that he was going to be moving on to the next venture and probably bringing the COO up into the CEO role. And the COO sat the whole time at lunch like this with me the entire time. And I was like, I can't take this job because this guy he's oppositional to me and he's going to become my direct report one day. And no matter how much I might like the current conditions, I have to think about that going forward. He is not open to me. He's either threatened by me or there's some block that he and I have where I can't take this job. So I love that whole, how people are sitting, how they're crossing their arms. What are some other tells that you see?
That is a perfect example. And you used context along with your own intuition to come to a decision based only on that.
Based on a guy sitting with his arms, the entire lunch, his arms were folded. Everything I said, he never changed his body language one time. And I thought, I cannot work with this guy.
And I bet you if you took a transcript of the conversation between the two of you and read it in a vacuum, it would seem totally normal.
Oh, yeah.
Like
and he was like, oh, yeah, Betsy, we're so excited. And I was like, yeah, but your arms are telling me we're going behind the mask, right? Your arms are telling me what your mouth is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in all candor, in looking for the tells that I'm looking for are one of two. We do either socially responsible, as I discussed, or personally responsible. And then it's leadership or non-leadership.
Okay.
And non-leaders, as I'm sure you're probably aware, abound. Now, you ask everybody if they're a leader, and they're all going to say yes. But a true leader is kind of rare, and you can see them shine like a beacon when they're in this scenario.
What do they do? Is that more of just like a charismatic penumbra, or what is it?
I will give you some now that is some of the secret.
Okay.
Some of the things
Right
that I
here.
use,
It's
yes,
happening.
some of the things I use that nobody else, I don't think even picks up on.
Okay.
You walk in, you see a panel, and you ask them, and somebody's like, yeah, I've been CFO of whatever company, and you're like, wow, that person's a leader. Then there's like a diner waitress. This is one of my favorite examples. And you notice the judge goes, okay, we're going to take a small break. And diner waitress goes, Judge, where's the bathroom? I go, this person with 50 was given instruction to go to the bathroom. She stopped, raised her hand, said, where's the bathroom? This is a leader of people. This is somebody who's like, regardless of her job, she's going to walk in there and possibly be offended if like some CEO who just happens to be also a leader in life is going to overtake her. This is somebody that you got to keep an eye on. This is a potential leader.
So I find that fascinating because I would never ask the judge that question because I have such a barrier between you never speak to the judge unless the judge speaks to you, number one. And number two, I wouldn't want anybody to see me not knowing something.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting. So
well, you would have very, very many flat. Like I would know that you're a leader based on your juror questionnaire, Betsy. That's not like that is different. What I'm talking about is you see her. She's been a diner waitress, but she would walk in there with the confidence to be able to convey her ideals. Like she.
So do you think
say,
she's doing that to let everybody else know where the bathroom is and to save everybody time, or help me understand?
I
that
think
better.
she really wanted to know where the bathroom was. Didn't know where it was and just didn't have the block that you're talking about. She didn't have the submissive,
because I'd
introverted
go outside
moment.
and ask a bailiff or somebody out in the lobby. I wouldn't ask the judge.
Me too. I would never.
Interesting.
But I'd be watching. I like to see what's going on and before I start doing any of that. But that's somebody who you can read something about their skill level and ability based on just what they would do that had nothing to do with the questioning. Another one is the protector. Like there are jurors who I've noticed somebody sitting next to them or somebody who's having problem hearing, they'll jump up and repeat. So the judge will go, so does anybody have any hardships for the next week? And you'll hear a juror go, he said hardships. Like that's somebody who jumped in to assist, or even physical contact when somebody gets upset or emotional while they're talking about something. That shows you something about this
person. Do people break down and cry during
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Help us understand that. What's going on there?
Well, it's not as crazy as it sounds, but people do have serious personal issues that they've gone through that cases like I've been hired to do resonate with. A medical malpractice case, for example, just yesterday, there was somebody whose father died as the result of medical malpractice. I did not like him as a juror at all. He had a terrible foundation, would not have been my juror, but he gave a very compelling story and got emotional about the fact that his father had a medical malpractice case and he had to be the executive over it. And because of that, I bluffed the defense that I liked him and made the defense use a peremptory strike on him. But I digress. That's an example of one. He really got emotional because of the situation he went through with his father. There's also, a litany of folks that automobile accidents in particular have drastically affected their lives. And when they start talking about it, they can tend to get emotional. Also, if they've had loss, and we're pulling people randomly from their lives. So there are people who have loved ones that are in hospice, they're about to pass, have recently passed. So, court is a rare chance for you to see kind of a slice of humanity that I don't think you get to see otherwise.
Like a pageant of it in a way. So what other, as we're thinking about things for our listeners to focus on, we've talked about how you dress, nonverbal cues. What are some other ways just in general you think people could use emotional intelligence as we think about kind of takeaways?
Sure. One is quite cliche now, and it's probably in chapter 1 of every EQ book that you read. And it's not just EQ, it's talked about, but it's something that I think a lot of people, including myself, struggle with, which is listening, not to say something next. It's listening to actually try and create a narrative in your head of what the person you're talking to is going through, because it's not just the story they're telling you. They are leaking out portions of their personality at all times. Little comments like, yeah, and then traffic was really bad. I mean, of course, always something's bad. Like that little comment, when they make something, they're showing what they're going through, that they're having a negative experience, whether they are or not. They're viewing their life, right? What they're going through as a negative experience. So when you are listening to people and preparing what you're going to say next, you're picking up the
you might
cues.
have missed that key comment.
Yeah, you're picking up the cues of what they're saying so that you can respond. But that's the same as the "How are you doing today?" conversation then, right?
Do you start with "How are you doing today" when you ask people in the jury box during a voir dire?
I start with how, on a scale, I go, "Good morning, everybody." On a scale of 0 to 10, how badly do you want to be here today? First you start with who wants to be here today?
Does anybody raise their hand?
Yeah. And by the way, anybody who wants to be on a jury, that's a huge red flag. I do not want a 10 out of 10 on my jury, because they are going to command the room. It's going to be a jury of one. Don't want it. So, but we start with that. And then usually I have a set of 6 questions that are: what do you do? What does your spouse do? Any military service, level of education, who would want to be the foreperson, and who considers themselves shy. I like to do that. My first cue I take is how people talk about their spouses. When people talk about their spouses in very different ways, and I find it incredibly insightful.
So give us an example.
Well, if somebody goes, my wife, the old ball and chain, she's at home, that's a different way than saying my partner is a stay-at-home mom. Like those are different ways of saying the same thing, correct? Anybody who refers to their significant other as partner, to me, is, as opposed to, more colloquial terms like ball and chain, that's going to automatically show that they have emotional maturity, that that they respect their partner and that they're in it together. So or if they do work, it's a big difference between, my wife is a clean room technologist at Blue Sphere versus my wife does something with science at that place over on the coast. Like, it clearly shows that they're not ready and automatically willing to engage in a conversation or be proud of what their spouse does. It's just a job. It's just what they do.
Well, it's interesting. So I'm a divorced person, and I will not let people refer to me as divorced. I'll say my marriage ended, or I insist on referring to my children's dad as my children's dad, because people get icked out when you talk about divorce or ex-spouses or whatever. So I try to keep things as positive as I can and keep things focused on, because I think you check out of the conversation when you hear things like that. It's like, I don't want to be involved in this. And so I try to choose words very carefully to sort of project a sense of it's okay, right? I'm divorced and it's okay. Not I'm divorced and I'm struggling and you should be brought into my world of struggle, but like, I'm divorced, it's a fact about me, but it's all okay, right? And so I do think that's really interesting, but I'm very intentional about it. I'm not accidentally saying that.
But you're doing that to convey an idea.
Yeah, which is, I'm kind of proud to be a single woman in my 50s and to enjoy a level of success with my kids and things like that. So, and I don't want to be treated as a victim of something. And so I try to reframe that stuff. But I think it's interesting when people do that accidentally. Like, I know people code language in a gender coded way that can tell you a lot about what they might be like to date, right? And so that's interesting that you're using that so effectively. When I think about emotional intelligence through the lens of emotional empathy and cognitive empathy, and then there's this whole piece about being empathetic. Is there a chance to be manipulative if you're really highly emotionally intelligent?
Well, that was one of the concerns I had when you invited me to discuss this topic. I have done a lot of research on this topic, obviously. am very intimately familiar with this topic. And out of the 3 prongs, empathy is not really something that is engaged in what I do. And because I use the other two prongs and not the third, it's very easy to view it as something that could be used to manipulate. And I guess it probably could. I would guess that people do, especially with the statistics you're reading of how few people actually understand it. I used the general term situational awareness throughout my whole life. It was automatic.
Yeah, you were born this way, Lady Gaga. This is like the rest of us have got to figure this out.
I just called it situational awareness, where I could always be walking, like I can be walking down the street and I'm not bumping into anybody because I like feel the flow of what's happening around me. A lot of people don't. They're focused, even if they're not focused on their phone. Even if they're not concerned with what's going on anywhere else, when really I'm more concerned with what's going on outside than what's going on inside, to be honest with you. So I'm walking around understanding and feeling that. I always called it situational awareness. Now, the empathetic portion of it, I would say is not a part of the jury selection process, but it's an easy step to take, in my opinion. I can see the conceptual step to understanding it and then using it to put yourself in other people's positions, because I mean, that's what I'm doing, is I'm reading where they're at in life. Is this person angry? Is this person got something going on? Are they going to take it out on my client? Are they foundationally incapable of seeing the case the way that we want them to see it? If you took one step further and got yourself into those shoes, then I could see you being able to devise ways of helping that person. I could see.
So as we wrap up, I want to think about practical things that our listeners could take away from this conversation. You know, we've talked a little bit about nonverbal cues, clothing, tells in people's language, the language under the language, so to speak. You know, as I think about the skills I have to draw upon to be influential in the way we do regional policy, for example, you know, I think about the setting of where we're going to have lunch to tell that story. What will I wear? What time of day will it be? Who else will be there? And I think a lot of people think that stuff just happens, but we actually put a lot of effort into that, because to be influential, you have to first and foremost make sure the person being influenced is just disarmed, right?
Of course.
And so we want to make sure that we're doing that. And all of that I meditate on a lot. As we wrap up, what are some takeaways that you think our listeners could focus on? Because they're going to look at you and say, oh, I'm not at that level of the game, but where do I start?
So the two things I would say are sword and shield.
Okay.
I would say sword is, as we discussed, listen. Like, really focus on listening and not just trying to pick up on cues to talk. Listen and observe. See what you think is abnormal. Ask questions of the person, maybe that they didn't know. Kind of try to understand, listen, and feel what's going on. We discussed that. The other portion I would say is, you use the word meditate. I would say whatever your self-care is. The reason why it's easy for somebody like me to read into this is because people have internal struggles and maybe they don't want to face it. And that's what allows it to leak out. The more you understand yourself, the more self-care you take, the more meditating, the more you really try to understand the issues. Nobody's perfect. Everybody's living a struggle at all times. But the more you understand your own, the less it's going to seep out of the corners and the more you can control it. So embrace who you are. I guess that's a pretty big statement to make and not an easy goal, but the more you can work on self-care, the more you can understand who you are, the less it will leak out, and it is more difficult for somebody to read what's actually going on, I guess.
I can't think of a better place to stop. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Nick Seidule of Bartleby and the Seidule Law Firm, and the Simone Biles of Emotional Intelligence.
Thank you so much for having me, Betsy. It's been an honor.
It's been a great discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.